Welcome back to Viewpoint. I'm Jonathan Scott, and tonight we're live from Broadcasting House with the Chief Minister Fabian Picardo. You too can have your say on Viewpoint at gbc.gi or by calling 200 79810. Mr. Picardo, we've been discussing your recent speech to the United Nations, and I'd like to ask you about your government's decision to take students with you to the UN.
Well, it's something that we said we would do when we were in opposition. We believe that the future of Gibraltar is its youth, of course, and they need to understand the institutions that affect Gibraltar, whether those are in New York at the United Nations or indeed in the European Union at the Commission in Brussels, etc. We've seen how we've taken two groups already to New York. Recently, the European movement, Albert Danino and Ivan Navas, took a group of youngsters to Brussels themselves. And I think that's the sort of exposure that Gibraltarians need to get at an early age to these institutions, to understand them and understand the importance of them to Gibraltar in the future. OK, well, those are the Chief Minister's thoughts on taking students to the end, but what did those students think of the experience and what did they make of Mr. Picardo's speech? We filed this report in New York.
Julian, you've been here at the UN, you've heard the Chief Minister's giving his address to the Fourth Committee. I believe you also went to Brussels not that long ago. How do they compare, or can't you really compare them?
It's both very different in its way, because one, we have to come to United Nations for issues on decolonization, but when we look at more internal issues, sort of the frontier clues, the bunkering, that happens at EU level. So it's very important for Gibraltar to consistently take part in both, not just in its EU or its UN, but in both different constituencies.
Did you enjoy it today?
Well, yes, it was something very different. I thought it was going to be a bit more smaller atmosphere, but how as soon as the Chief Minister started speaking, everyone was fully attentive towards him. And the person that spoke before, there you saw people using their phones, but as soon as the Chief Minister spoke, everyone turned straight to looking at him. So it was something very impressive. OK, I'll move on to Megan. Megan, what did you make of today?
Well, I was extremely interested in both the Ambassador of Spain's point of view and obviously our own Gibraltarian point of view. And I just loved being there, and I'm a very big supporter of why we have to be here. You mentioned the Spanish delegate. You heard both speeches. Yeah. What did you make of what he had to say? I didn't personally agree with his opinion, and I was actually quite angry when he was speaking. I couldn't help myself but think, no, I felt that a lot of the things he was saying were not true, or at least not true to the Gibraltarian point of view.
Mostly when the Spanish, the point that they put across, I don't think it was true really towards Gibraltar. So yeah, I don't agree with what they were saying much. Okay, so what did you think of what the Chief Minister said? So I think he gave a really, really good speech. He was really passionate about Gibraltar being British, and yeah, I really agree with what he said. Okay, would you like to come again, do you think? Yes, for sure, I would.
Fantastic, you know, obviously I think it's a necessity now that we show ourselves on international stages. Like, for example, I went to Brussels a couple of weeks ago to visit our representatives there. And I think now more than ever, it's time to take the opportunity in our international stages and really make an impression. I think Fabian did a very good job today. And hopefully we carry it on to the future, so we keep hammering on at our issues and make sure that we eventually get delisted. I see you're on first-name terms with the Chief Minister. Well, but we're all a family, aren't we? OK, and do you think that possibly you might even like entering the political arena one day? Well, it's certainly it would be an honour. I'm obviously very proud to be here in the first place and be representing Gibraltar in Brussels and here as well. And I think it could definitely be an option in the future, yeah.
Fabian Picardo's speech, for me, I felt so proud, and I literally even got goosebumps when he was speaking. I just felt really proud to be Gibraltarian at that moment, and I think he's a really great representative. Do you think you're going to, I suppose you already have an interest in politics given that you're here, but will this sort of event, if you like, make you follow politics even more closely? With the topic of the UN and about Gibraltar being a colony and being itself government, I think I would like to continue studying and actually learning more about the UN itself, and I really enjoyed the whole experience here. Great, and how about you, Anna?
I've enjoyed every minute of it. If I could come again, I should be the first one to try. I just love this kind of thing. Like, Fabian was so passionate in his speeches. Like Rebecca said, I got goosebumps and everything. Good, so would you also like the opportunity to come again, do you think, at some point in the future? It would be an honour.
Well, Well, Mr. Picardo, if you do lower the voting age, it sounds like you might have won yourself a few votes.
Look, I'm very inspired by the people that we take to the UN because they are the next generation of Gibraltarians. If we simply fight this for this generation and then lose interest in 5 or 10 or 20 years' time, then we will be completely run over. We need to ensure that we inspire the next and that they are inspired by us.
And what was the sort of feedback you got from them? What was the feeling you got from them? They sound like they were very intellectually engaged with the exercise.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, remember that I don't want to call them children because they don't speak like children. They're not in any way children as far as I'm concerned. They're young adults and they really have a deep understanding of these issues. They've written an essay by the time that they are selected to come to the United Nations, which shows us that they have appreciated the importance of the UN and the institutions and how it works, and they're coming to learn more about it. So I think we have very mature young people in Gibraltar who understand the Gibraltar issue. I think our schools teach an element of that in liberal studies, etc. And of course, in every home in Gibraltar, we make young Gibraltarian politicians. But the fact that there is the caliber of the sort that you've seen on television tonight makes me relaxed that I can be sure that in the future there will be representatives for Gibraltar who will be much better than those that we have today.
Okay, well, one of the themes in your speech, which we've been reflecting on there, was, of course, the incursions, if anybody has just tuned in, the incursions by Spanish into British Gibraltar waters. I believe we've got a caller at the moment. Derek wants to ask a question about the incursions and how they're dealt with. Good evening, Derek.
Good evening. Can I just first congratulate our Chief Minister for his sterling work and indeed that of the whole government. My question is as follows. Can the Chief Minister inform us whether the British government will be stepping up its naval presence in Gibraltar by this, and specifically referring to sending us more naval resources to patrol our British territorial waters from further Spanish incursions? Thank you very much and good night.
Mr. Picardo.
Well, thank you, Derek, for that praise. I sincerely appreciate it. But one of the things we debated earlier was whether we should see larger naval assets in Gibraltar. Of course, it's not just the ships that we're talking about. We also need to think about the crews. At one stage, we were very stretched with the crews that we have, and they're now on watch 24 hours a day because an incursion can come at any particular time. I know the United Kingdom extended the number of people who were going to be in Gibraltar for a period of time, and I think that extension has continued so that we can have people on watch 24 hours a day. And look, whether it's the GDP, the RGP, or of course the men and women of the Gibraltar Squadron, they are doing a fantastic job out there in very challenging circumstances, dealing with very reckless and negligent actions by Spanish state vessels, some of them more negligent than others. We saw recently that there was a Spanish customs vessel navigating without lights. That's what our police, what our defence police and what our Royal Naval Squadron have to deal with. It is extraordinarily challenging. I've been out on the water with all of them. It gets very murky out there, especially at night, and the job that they do already with the resources that they have available is one that we must always praise, even if we might wish that they'd be given more resources to be able to do more.
We're also looking at now some pictures of the Ramon Margalef, which was a survey ship which entered our waters, if I'm not mistaken, in November last year. But we've had a survey ship in our waters more recently. What do you think the Spanish are up to with survey vessels?
Look, this is typical behaviour if you understand the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. What they're trying to do are the things that states are allowed to do in their own waters. So all of those things which demonstrate that you are sovereign are the things that they are trying to do. But of course, look, they're fighting against the United Nations Convention itself and the demarcation of BGTW. So as I told you before, to a very great extent, they are trying to climb Everest without oxygen. That doesn't mean we shouldn't challenge what they do and be ready to see whether we can do more to stop them from doing it, but that is the purpose of what they do and why they are doing it in a particular way. But look, it's disgraceful behaviour, and it really is from a state that should be saving its pennies to bring itself out of the sort of financial state in which it finds itself, and where Gibraltar is extending a hand of friendship and wanting to cooperate at a commercial and economic level, to see that that is rejected, and in fact we see the sort of waste that we've seen with the Ángeles Alvarinho and the Ramon Margalef is just really quite incredible.
I've noticed that talk of the economy seems to be on the up whenever, in any discussion about Gibraltar and its significance or its potential significance even for Spain. I notice that your government does so, and also that the UK government always mentions at every opportunity how important the Gibraltar economy is for the nearby Spanish economy, but moreover how important it could be? Were there to be more cooperation?
Indeed, I think it's an important issue to highlight, because if our neighbours are suffering economically and we can assist them economically by cooperating and working together, and it would be a mutually beneficial cooperation, then I think it's the right thing to highlight. And the United Kingdom, as you rightly say, is doing so also, because one of the things that I think we've managed to achieve in the past 2 years and 10 months is that Gibraltar and the United Kingdom very much in lockstep. We're trying to work together on these issues. Of course, Gibraltar can make its case in international tribunal, can release press releases which are picked up in the international media. But if we are working with the United Kingdom on these issues, then we can amplify our position much more widely, and we get our message sent much more widely and understood much more widely.
A couple more questions on email in respect of the incursions. Salvador writes, his opinion is that the matter of the sovereignty threats that are the incursions, if they were ever to cease, it would have to be through a court of law, as the diplomacy just seems to keep us going round and round in circles.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and I think most Gibraltarians listening will agree. Most of our Foreign Office colleagues would agree also if they could hear that comment, because, of course, the United Kingdom challenged Spain in 1966 to go to the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, or the ICJ, in relation to self-determination. For 50 years, they have just said no. They turned us down in December 1966. Mr. Margallo, in a recent speech to a Spanish university, made very clear why it was that they would not be turning up in that tribunal, because the advice that they have is that they would likely lose. Well, I think we'd managed to work that one out, but it's even more worrying that, knowing that they are not entitled to do what they're doing, and that they would lose in an independent, impartial tribunal if they sought to assert that right there, they're trying to do it physically on the water. It's really quite impossible to understand.
Do you think?
No, I think this is just an attempt to put pressure, and what Spain needs to realise is that the people of Gibraltar have demonstrated to them that we're each as hard as our rock, and we don't feel pressure. I mean, they've closed the frontier on us, and we've stuck to our guns. They put economic pressure on us for the past 30 years since the frontier was open, and we've stuck to our guns. They've made incursions for years immemorial, now more than in the past, and we've stuck to our guns. She makes no progress. I mean, what about a Spain that were to actually turn around and say to the Gibraltarians, you know what, I'm very sorry about the way I've treated you for the past 60 years since the last visit of Her Majesty the Queen to Gibraltar. We shouldn't have thrown our toys out of the pram at you for 60 years. And we're going to take a completely different attitude to you now, which is complete friendship, complete understanding, and working together. And you know what? If one day you want to be Spanish, give us a call. I mean, that's the neighbour we'd love to have. Our relationship with Spain would be completely different. It would be one of mutual respect. It would be one which would enable us to work together for mutual benefit. And, I would like to think that there would be no one in Gibraltar who would pick up the phone to call Spain to say that they would like to be Spanish. But there's more likely to be a call if you treat people with respect and in that way than otherwise. I mean, I would be one of the ones in Gibraltar saying, fantastic, Spain now respects us. Let's stick to our guns and continue to be British because we want to. But, frankly, trying to humble us into submission, trying to squeeze us and force us into submission has not worked and will not work.
I think you've made that point very clearly.
Thank you.
A question from Charles, who says, do you think it's ironic that Spain has achieved a seat at the UN Security Council when it flagrantly breaches the sovereignty of Gibraltar waters and treats us with such contempt?
Well, I mean, there are two attitudes that you can take to this. One of them is the attitude that I heard some people display at the time, that Spain did not win the Olympics for Madrid, which was to say, that's one in your eye, Spain, and you treat us so badly that if you haven't got the Olympics, good, because, that gets you back.
Well, Sir Graham Watson suggested that it might even have been because of Gibraltar that Britain didn't back their bid.
He did suggest that, although I've seen no evidence of that. So I can understand that. I'm a normal Gibraltarian too, and I can almost feel that too. But look, if the Olympics had been in Spain, most of us would have thought of that as delivering some positives for Gibraltar, because we might have been able to attract more tourism to Gibraltar. If Spain was flooded with many millions of tourists because there's an Olympics there, we will get a benefit from that. And if there is an Olympics in Spain, it's very likely many Gibraltarians will be able to Madrid to watch the basketball and watch some of the sports that we all love. So there are benefits. And so let us transpose that into the Security Council position. If Spain had not got into the Security Council today, then tomorrow she would have been looking for a scapegoat. You've seen in some of the recent publications that it has been suggested by the Spanish Foreign Minister that one of the issues which might have affected how the United Kingdom might vote in the Security Council was the issue of Gibraltar. So if we were going to be the scapegoat tomorrow if they didn't get in, well then look, let's raise a glass of champagne that Spain did get into the Security Council despite the fact that her treatment of Gibraltar does not merit it, because perhaps tonight they'll be raising 2 glasses of champagne and tomorrow they'll not be looking for scapegoats. They'll be trying to get over their hangover and do what Mr. Margallo has said today, which I found actually quite positive. Mr. Margallo said today that now forming part of the Security Council, Spain has to step up to the responsibility of what being on the Security Council means. Now, I sincerely hope that that means continuing to take a less belligerent attitude to Gibraltar, understanding Spain's place in the world. Gibraltar is not important to Spain. Spain can do a lot more for the world than simply try and take over our sovereignty. She can be an important part of bringing stability to North Africa because of her influence there. She can be an important part of assisting the European nations already on the Security Council to ensure that Western parliamentary democracies prevail on issues like ISIL in the Middle East and unfortunately also potentially in North Africa. And those are the positives that we need to concentrate on. Would we have been happier to see Spain not enter the Security Council because of the way that she treats us? Well, look, perhaps every Gibraltarian might have allowed ourselves a wry smile, but we need to think of this with our heads and not with our hearts.
The second part to Charles's question is, do you feel that the UK might have vetoed this?
The Security Council permanent members do not have a right of veto, as I understand it, in relation to membership of the Security Council. And the convention is that they don't say who they voted for, because as permanent members, they need to remain strictly neutral in their relationship with all the other 188 other member states of the United Nations. So I think that has to be respected.
Okay. I'd like to move on if I can. We've got approximately 10 minutes, a little bit over 10 minutes to go in the programme. I'd like to move on to the question of talks. We've seen how much your views, and I dare say those of many Gibraltarians, differ to Spain's in respect of what's happening in the waters around the rock. We've seen some emails that back up your position, and also at the frontier. All parties agree that dialogue is the way forward, but even here you disagree on how this should happen. You, the Gibraltar government and the Spanish government. I'll ask you for your views in just a moment, but first let's hear what Spain's permanent mission to the United Nations said last week about dialogue.
La cual dio lugar al denominado proceso de Bruselas. Señor presidente, naturalmente, los intereses...
Of course, the interests of this population of Gibraltar must be taken into account, as the United Nations has pointed out. But in the process of negotiation with Spain, the coordination and political pursuit of those interests must be carried out by the UK as administering power and the international responsible party for the territory, and always within the framework established by the appropriate UN resolutions. Accordingly, Gibraltar cannot be a party in the dialogue on sovereignty between Spain and the UK, the only 2 competent parties in that regard, according to the established doctrine of the UN.
So, Mr. Picardo, Spain says yes to regional talks on matters of cooperation, like policing, for example, but they argue any talks that touch upon sovereignty should be bilateral between them and the UK. What's your response to that?
Well, can I just take up one point that you made? You suggested that there was a difference between Gibraltar and Spain on these issues. I think it's probably better explained in the context of there being a difference between the United Kingdom and Gibraltar on the one hand and Spain on the other. It's not that Gibraltar is alone on this issue. The United Kingdom and Gibraltar have both said that we remain firmly committed to the Trilateral Forum for Dialogue, and we both jointly proposed in a letter from William Hague in April 2012 the possibility of ad hoc talks being created that dealt at a technical level with any particular issues that might arise. And if there wasn't a trilateral where these things could be talked about because the present Spanish government didn't want to have one, then we could have these ad hoc talks instead of having any quadrilateral talks, which is really what the the ambassador of Spain is talking about when he's talking about these regional cooperating bodies, or indeed ever going back to the Brussels process. I think it is now abundantly clear that the position that Joe Bolsonaro took in 1984 when the Brussels process was first announced is the position that everybody else has now signed up to, even those who previously might have defended the Brussels process. So there's no question of there being any bilateral talks between the United Kingdom and Spain on Gibraltar. In fact, there is one area of interesting agreement between Gibraltar and Spain, and that is that both Gibraltar and Spain consider the issue of sovereignty to be a bilateral one. We just don't agree on who should be involved in that lateralism. Spain says it should be her and the United Kingdom. Of course, Spain has absolutely no say in relation to the sovereignty of Gibraltar, as she sometimes accepts herself in the speeches made by her ambassadors at the United Nations. She signed Gibraltar away under a treaty. They need to sometimes remind themselves of that. The sovereignty of Gibraltar today vests in the British Crown and in the people of Gibraltar, and it is only the United Kingdom and Gibraltar that are relevant to a discussion about the future sovereignty of Gibraltar. But there is much more that we can talk about with Spain. Now, there are issues which are big issues, which are political issues, and which can engage us in really looking at how we can work together going forward. And then there are minor technical issues. And what we are condemned to at the moment with the ad hoc process, instead of the trilateral process, is to simply look at some of these technical issues that can run in parallel to the continuing existence of the trilateral, where technical people who might before simply have been allowed to pick up the phone to each other but are not allowed to do so at the moment by the Spanish government, have to raise the opportunity to discuss a technical issue to the level of ad hoc talks. And as I've told Parliament today, those will be very, very low-level technical talks looking at very technical, detailed issues with no power of decision in the technicians who attend those talks. Everything would be ad referenda to the relevant governments.
Could you illustrate it with an example?
Well, look, for example, one of the things that I think we'll end up talking about if we ever have an ad hoc is about the frontier. And how their new systems will interact with our new systems and how we can make those things work better.
Do you think it would be important for you to talk?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm told by people with experience that even in the 60s and 70s and in the 80s when the frontier opened, etc., that those talks, those technical talks were very fluid and happened without the need for anybody to be given permission to talk to each other. Today, the Spanish government has taken the view that their officials are not allowed to talk to ours because of the attitude that the Partido Popular has taken since its election. So these ad hoc talks,
sort of an order, so to speak.
Well, it seems to be followed quite strictly by people, but it therefore seems to me that if we do have an ad hoc, it really is a bit of a damp squib in the sense that it will just be the sort of thing that people might have talked about before, and then go back to politicians for guidance on. But it's not a question of there being a table with people discussing things intently, with voices, votes, and vetoes being relevant. Of course, we will have our own voice. We will have our vote in the sense that nothing will be determined at those meetings. I'm never going to put Gibraltar in a position, by the way, when we talk about votes, and the leader of the opposition says that it's important that we have a vote at all of these things, an independent vote. Of course, I agree with that, but I'm never going to put Gibraltar in a position where it can be voted down 2-1, even in the trilateral context. And we're going to have a veto because the people who are going to turn up at the technical level are not going to be able to agree things. They're not going to have the consent of the politicians to agree things. They're going to have to come back ad referenda to us to see whether we are prepared to progress with any potential issue that may be put. But these are very technical issues. You know, when we were talking about the Brussels process, those talks were only about sovereignty. We're talking about the trilateral talked about looking at the future of Gibraltar. When we're talking about ad hoc talks, we're literally looking at the detail of where we should put a nut or a bolt and where the lanes might or might not be at the frontier. Not the sort of thing where we need to have absolutely any concern that we might have somebody steal a march past us politically.
There are a few emails which are slightly off topic, and I'm afraid I'm trying my best to read through them and discern which ones are just about squeezed through. Dear Chief Minister, from Michael, Gibraltar has been entrusted to negotiate double tax treaties with other sovereign nations and various territories. Would a firm statement from your government that a similar arrangement exists to any talks on sovereignty make Spain finally realise that it's your government and the Gibraltarians that she needs to deal with, and woe if she wants to achieve its objectives?
Well, indeed, I wrote to Mr. Montoro, who's the Spanish Minister for Hacienda, or Income Tax, some time ago, explaining to him that there were a number of gateways already available to Spain if she wanted to receive information from Gibraltar, which include directives and include OECD multilateral agreements which allow these gateways to work, and also offering again a bilateral tier and explaining that Gibraltar is able to sign these tiers under a letter of entrustment, so that therefore even the old argument that Spain deploys, because we have to understand her logic in order to try and see whether we can find a way forward, which is that the Gibraltar Constitution should not be seen as creating a people distinct from that of the UK with its own separate government, which she's always resisted for UN purposes, but we don't actually sign tiers on the basis of our constitutional right. We actually sign them with specific powers of attorney, in fact, which are called in international law, when they're given to overseas territories and crown dependencies, letters of entrustment, and that's how we sign tiers. So signing a tier with Gibraltar would not offend even Spain's rule, which is completely wrong and we don't accept, that she doesn't accept our signature on a piece of paper because she doesn't see the Constitution as empowering us properly in any event.
It should be the UK, she says.
It should be the UK, she says. But look, the UK letter of entrustment is like any power of attorney between individuals, but here we're talking between distinct juridical international actors, the United Kingdom and Gibraltar. So she should accept that because it doesn't in any way challenge her dogma or her logic of her claim to Gibraltar.
Okay, we're running out of time, but let's get Richard's point across. May the Chief Minister expand on what the Spanish media company that is doing PR for your government is doing to counter false propaganda, of which we've heard some by way of the Spanish, the permanent mission to the United Nations. Richard thinks that some private individuals are doing a better and more visible job than the company that you employ in Madrid. I'm merely reading out.
Well, that's all right. That's exactly the sort of thing that I would expect if a company like Grupo Albion were doing a good job, because the job that they're doing is not as visible as some others might be doing. They're trying to get not onto just Twitter and Facebook and be seen to put positions. What they're actually doing, which is much more important, is to get into editorial hearts and minds. It's a very slow process. You may have seen some very good articles in some leading Spanish newspapers, some very bad ones as well, but in particular in El País, for example, which is the Times of Spain, if there are any equivalents, some material has been put into that newspaper which actually contains the right data about Gibraltar. Now, there are different writers in that newspaper, and some writers might put one position and others might put another. But this is about winning hearts and minds when you're dealing with journalists and trying to persuade them that it's their government in Spain that's trying to lie to them and demonstrating to them that our data is the right data. This is not just high-profile work, and the work that we have to do is on social media. It's live on the media in Spain. I've done some work on Spanish television, which has been arranged by the Grupo Albion. It's also about translating things that come out of the Gibraltar government so that Spanish journalists understand our message very early on. And one thing that Grupo Albion does is translate our relevant press releases very quickly on the day where they're released. So when you see them in the Spanish newspapers, they've been translated in time.
They're available.
A very important issue as well.
So in short, you're very happy with the work that they're doing? Very
happy indeed. And I don't want to say much more about it because otherwise the Spanish government might start stopping them from doing what they're doing.
We're about out of time, but I'd like to ask you two questions. You talked about a fight there for the hearts and minds in Spain, and obviously the thrust of our programme has been the United Nations. Will you win the fight in Spain of ideas? And secondly, will you be successful at the United Nations in your time as a politician?
I have right and truth on my side, like every Gibraltarian, when it comes to Gibraltar, so I'm convinced we will eventually prevail. I hope it is in my time, because every Chief Minister of Gibraltar would like it to be in his time, but otherwise I hope to be simply setting the foundations and making them stronger for the man or woman who comes after me. And I hope one day there is a woman Chief Minister of Gibraltar very soon who might be able to persuade the international community that we're right.
Well, we've discussed the contents of your recent speech. It's clear you'll continue to go to the United Nations to put across Gibraltar's views at the UN. Are you hopeful that the UN, as I said, will be able to help the ROC perhaps by way of a visit?
We're changing the way that we approach that issue. We're talking about it in the committee, but we're also trying to ensure that we influence decision makers in a different way to persuade them more directly of the importance of a visit. I think the C24 has now been to all the listed territories on a number of occasions and never to Gibraltar. I think we therefore have an important rod with which to beat them.
Well, fingers crossed. It's a very interesting conversation, and one that no doubt will continue in the coming days, weeks and months. But that's all we've got time for tonight, Mr. Picardo. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Viewpoint is on your screens every Thursday. We'll see you at the same time next week. From all the team at Broadcasting House, from Mr. Picardo and myself, thank you for watching and good night.